Well, hey there. Welcome back to another episode of C-Suite Unplugged, an Alberta Better podcast series. In this series, host Adam Legg talks to Alberta's top CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business leaders about their journey to the C-Suite, what keeps them up at night as an Albertan and as a leader in their industry, and what their outlook is for the future. Now, what happens when you take leadership experience and not one, not two, but three tech unicorns and combine that with a deep passion for people and corporate purpose? Well, you get Kelly Schmitt, a phenomenal Alberta leader who now heads up a global software company called Benevity. And hailing from a small farm town in Saskatchewan, Kelly found a love of numbers and learned the value of hard work early on. And she has carried these two lessons with her throughout her career in finance and technology. And in this conversation with Adam, Kelly shares more career lessons, advice for young professionals, and what's next for Benevity.
So I'm very excited today to welcome Kelly Schmitt, the CEO at Benevity. Now the head of one of Alberta's early tech unicorns, which for those unfamiliar with the term is a tech company with a valuation exceeding $1 billion. Kelly has been a leader in the technology space, having worked at three of Alberta's unicorns. One might call her the lucky charm of the Alberta tech sector. As you'll hear today, Kelly is very passionate about people, especially equity, diversity, and inclusion work. And she's also very passionate about ensuring everyone has the opportunity to succeed. So welcome to the show, Kelly.
Thanks, Adam.
So before we dig in, could you give us your elevator pitch as to your role and Benevity?
Sure. So I'm the CEO at Benevity. Benevity is the market leader in what we call global corporate purpose software. So our platform's used by more than 800 companies around the world, including the likes of Apple and Google and Amazon and Nike, and of course, many companies here in Alberta, such as Suncor and ATB and TC Energy. It's used by these companies to power their community investment and employee giving and volunteering programs. And essentially, the platform was built to democratize giving back. So to give individuals the ability to support the causes that they care about, and also the ability to do good in a variety of ways. So whether that's giving your time, giving your money in an amount, however big or small, or just through doing pro-social actions like reducing your carbon footprint or your water usage, or learning about a topic such as mental health or diversity, equity, and inclusion.
It's you guys are truly a tremendous success story for Alberta and Alberta's tech sector. And Kelly, congratulations on how you've been part of growing the company to where it is today. One of the things that our listeners love to hear the stories of our CEOs in terms of their journeys. And so I wonder if you could share with us the journey of Kelly, fresh out of high school, wondering what to do, to now the CEO of Benevity.
Yeah, great question. So I grew up on a farm in small town Saskatchewan. And when I say small, I mean small. The town was about 500 people when I lived there, and it's smaller today. So my high school graduating class was 8 people, and I did not know anyone who wore a suit, other than to a wedding or a funeral. And so certainly didn't know what a CFO or a CEO did. So I think there's probably 2 things from that upbringing that stuck with me. Mm-hmm. One is I've always been interested in numbers. And I think I was influenced by, watching my parents sit at the end of our kitchen table, trying to balance the books for our farm on ledger paper using an adding machine. So that was one. And also I learned the value of hard work. And I think both of those things, benefited me as I moved throughout my career, which was primarily in finance. So if you kind of fast forward 25 years from high school, I succeeded Benevity's founder as the CEO here just over a year ago. And definitely none of this was in any master plan that I ever had. And in fact, I was pretty sure I didn't ever want to be a CEO. And the reason is I didn't like being in the spotlight. I still don't love being in the spotlight. But I sort of looked at the role and I thought, I had to be the company's best salesperson, or I had to be a great product visionary or a thought leader in the space or something like that. And it wasn't until I realized that the job is really all about people. So my role is, build a great team, continue to reinforce an already great culture. And once I realized that, I decided to take the leap, and now here we are.
That's awesome. So did your background in finance, did you pursue finance in school and move into then finance roles before the CEO role?
Yeah, exactly. So I did do my Bachelor of Commerce here at the University of Calgary, and then ultimately came up through corporate finance and the treasury side before ultimately moving into CFO roles.
Yeah. And what has there been any unique perspective gained from that corporate finance side that frames your thinking of leadership? You talked about people, and frankly, that's kind of rare from a true corporate finance person. They're all about the number side of the equation as opposed to the people side of the equation. How did you achieve that balance of obviously got the numbers bona fides, but also the people focus?
Yeah, I think I was probably somewhat of an atypical finance person in that I probably leaned more to the operation. So I've always been very interested in how all parts of the business worked, and having a base of knowledge in finance is a good underpinning because, really at the end of the day, it's like, how do all of those things impact the numbers, right? And so, I was probably even in my CFO roles, really more of a chief operating officer type, and really just, always thought sort of laterally across the business and what the drivers were sort of in, all parts of the business. And so probably, definitely helped me on my path to ultimately being the CEO.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's great to have that balanced perspective, both the numbers and the operations and the people side. Kelly, what's your leadership philosophy as you oversee the company and how it performs, its people, its numbers? What's your leadership philosophy?
I don't know if it's much of a philosophy. There's two things that come to mind there. One is I'm very authentic and transparent. So I often say, like, I wear my heart on my sleeve. Like, what you see is what you get. You'll know if I'm happy, mad, or sad. And I'm not scared to be vulnerable. So one example is, I cried at a full company town hall last week about the crisis in the Ukraine. And our team has been working sort of round the clock these last couple of weeks to support those efforts. And it's been really hard work and really emotional work. And I just feel, being authentic and, showing people that you're just a real person like them, it makes them feel better about what they're experiencing, and I think drives much more of a connection to the company culture. The other thing from a leadership perspective, this might seem trite, but it's like, always hire people who are smarter than you and better than you at every role you're filling, right? Like, just don't be scared. Don't be scared to do that. And so I think my role is, giving people just that compelling vision, or giving them the why, and then hiring fantastic people and just getting out of their way and letting them do their jobs. And of course, being there to support them when they need you.
I can't remember where I first heard that, hire people that are smarter than you, but I've definitely tried to follow that as much as I can. And it's so far has worked out well. So I agree with your philosophy there totally. Kelly, what's a day in the life of Kelly look like? Do you have any sort of standard routines or practices that you do for yourself, for your family, for the company, for productivity, et cetera?
Yes, I have a few. So, I think the first thing is, being a CEO, it's by far the hardest job I've ever had. And I knew it would be when I took it. So that's not a surprise. And I think because it's all about people, it can feel like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders. And so I have multiple routines that focus on my mental and physical health. And so, first one is I work out 7 days a week, typically first thing in the morning, and that sets me sort of in the right place for the day. I drink, I guess you'd call it like an adrenal cocktail in the morning as well, that boosts my energy and my immune system. So happy to share the recipe for that if anyone's interested. Yes, I meet regularly with a mindfulness and meditation coach, and I'll be honest, I am not much of a meditator. That it just seems too slow for me, and my brain moves pretty fast. But the mindfulness part is actually really beneficial, and I think it's those types of things that keep me going through sort of what's a typical day, because it starts really early with a workout, and then starting with, my kids who are 6 and 3. And then the middle is, 10 or 12 hours of meetings or just other sort of Benevity decisions and intensity. And then And then the day ends with the kids as well. And part of my routine is if I'm in town, I make sure I'm there to put them to bed at night. And sort of the building would have to be burning down for me to miss that. It's a really key part of my routine. So that's kind of a typical day.
Wow, that's a lot, Kelly. Just personal fitness, wellness, work, family. That's a ton to juggle. And I will say, yes, we would love to know your adrenal cocktail recipe. Now, is it a custom elixir, or is this something you found somewhere else?
Yeah, something that like a doctor of Chinese medicine recommended, and I started it a few months ago, and it's actually amazing the difference it makes to my energy levels. So I'll make sure we could share that in the show notes for this podcast.
Awesome. We'll definitely share the wisdom with everybody. Kelly, is there anything that people would be surprised to know about you? I mean, I've tons of really cool stuff there in terms of your daily practices, but anything, a personal hobby or passion that people would be surprised to know or find intriguing about Kelly?
Yeah, I have to be honest, most of my personal hobbies and passions were sort of, put on hold, while being an exec and having children. And one that I've been able to pick up in the last couple of weeks, after 7 years, I strapped on my downhill skis and we're teaching both kids how to ski, which has been fun. I think the thing that actually just a lot of people are surprised by, for those who don't know this about me already, is just that we had both of our children while I was a CFO. And I took 8 months off with each of them. And so I didn't work during my mat leaves, and, nothing bad happened. The companies didn't go out of business. And so it's that kind of thing that I think companies need to support if they really want to walk the talk on DE&I.
Yeah, exactly. We can't harm the career trajectories of female leaders that are taking time to be with young children and whatnot. We have to create the space and enable that career trajectory to continue on just as if they hadn't been on mat leave, et cetera. So I totally agree with you. Kelly, let's switch to Benevity. I've heard folks at Benevity speak about the company's role and other companies' ESG efforts, as sort of an ESG enabler. What does Benevity mean by that in terms of helping other companies achieve their efforts?
Yeah, so if you start with the S, or the social piece of ESG, that's of course the piece that's all about people. So, are your employees engaged? Is your board and is your team diverse? How do you treat your people? How well do you treat them? And, Benevity is really helping companies help their people to be their best selves. We do that by connecting them with a sense of purpose. And in the process of doing that, we drive both social impact and business impact at the same time. And so, we're supporting, community investment and employee giving and volunteering programs. Like I said, those programs are actually engaging their teams around the S in ESG. And actually, to some extent, but I would say to a smaller extent, the E as well. So when you focus on some of the challenges that people can do in our platform, like reducing their carbon footprint, which I mentioned earlier, it sort of ties a bit to the E as well.
Yeah, it is a platform for companies to enable them to deliver on ESG commitments, both as a company, but also as a staff engagement tool and retention tool, attraction tool. Yeah, it's a fascinating platform. Kelly, you spoke about the importance of people. That's really your focus these days, and you've obviously built a very strong culture at Benevity. I'd love to hear you speak more about how you view people, the role of people in growing a successful company. What is the culture of Benevity, and how have you built that over time?
Yeah, this is a good one. So I would say, every company says they have great people, and I've worked in some really good companies. And I would say that the team at Benevity is quite unique as a culture. It's very highly supportive. It's highly empathetic, and of course, the people are very passionate about our goodness mission. And so, how that translates is, we have a culture of passionate client service, but I would say we go the extra mile, not just for our clients, but also for each other, like highly supportive of each other, very low to no politics. And so I certainly cannot take credit for building the culture from the get-go, because Benevity's 14 years old and I've been around for 3.5. But ultimately, the culture does start with our values, and we've got a little acronym for our values that spells out the word happy with a few extra A's. But the H, or the humility piece of that, is quite near and dear to us. And being humble means being very self-aware, very open to feedback. It's about constant learning and improvement, and that is sort of a key piece to the culture. And so, for example, when we think about people's performance, it's not just about what they delivered, it's how they did it. And that's where the values come into play. And also just through the values, that's how we ensure that we're maintaining, the parts of the culture that are really important to us and make us special. Because of course, as you grow, to the levels that we've grown and we continue to grow and change, the culture doesn't stay the same. It evolves, but the tricky part is keeping the pieces that really make us special and make us unique. So for example, one evolution that's happened in the time that I've been with the company is just the level of business acumen and financial acumen went up a lot. And it's a necessary evolution when you've got private equity investors who expect you to hit certain growth targets. And I always think it's better that everyone in the business understands how they contribute to those results, for example, right? So it's like, we're adding to it and it's evolving all the time, but some of those key things like humility, like authenticity, like our strong belief that people should be able to just show up as who they are and do their best work and not waste time trying to fit in, those parts have stayed constant.
And maybe sort of a two-parter question, Kelly, but it's sort of built on the same theme, is that as you grow and you have multiple offices, I'd love to get your take on how easy/hard it's been to maintain the roots of the culture. And then also with the pandemic, how hard has it been to maintain culture in largely a virtual setting? I know for me, I found that the most difficult part was just staring at a little square of my colleagues on a screen. And you try and do things that build culture, but it can be tremendously difficult virtually, I found. But I'd love to get your take on how you built and preserved culture as you've grown and as you've navigated the pandemic.
So if I think about how we've added offices over the years, so sort of to start with the first part of the question, a lot of it has been through acquisitions, right? So for example, we bought a company last year that's headquartered in Switzerland, but the majority of the people are in Barcelona. And so now we've got 2 new offices, right? I would say that we probably look to cultural fit as the number one criteria for an acquisition, right? And so, when I first met the founders of the company Alaya that we've since acquired, if I'd closed my eyes, I would have thought they worked for Benevity. Like that's how strong the fit was. And so we try to make sure that's there so that as we keep expanding our global reach, it's not as big of an issue to sort of try to maintain the culture. I will say the last 2 years in the pandemic have been very challenging. And there's no question that, we're itching to get people back together. I actually interestingly got updated numbers on this today because I said, I'm going to guess like about half of the company joined during the pandemic. So has never been to an office, a big Benevity cultural event, has never seen what it's like. And I got the numbers back and it's 52%. So wow. 52% of our people, so just over 480 of 900 and change have joined during COVID and don't, when we think about what the culture was pre-pandemic and how full of energy the offices were and those events and sort of the sparks that would happen when we got together, they've never seen that, right? So we've been able to maintain, I think, a really good culture during the pandemic. But like you said, like we're all tired of staring at Zoom. And we're now in this process now of sort of, we're calling it a COVID conscious office reopening where people are starting to trickle in, and you can just sort of see the energy that, that's sort of happening when people get back together. So going forward, the world for sure has changed. We're not going to go back to, working in an office, 5 days a week type of thing. And especially in the tech industry, we're very much in a virtual and hybrid world, but we're trying to be really thoughtful about when and how we bring people together and for what purpose to make sure we still get that human connection. The human connection is so important, and the casual conversations that happen when people together versus the formal ones that are scheduled on Zoom. So, we've done okay. We've been able to to grow. And I think the culture is still very strong, but we're definitely missing the in-person element of it.
Yeah. No, I know I'm excited to be back amongst my colleagues in person. It's tremendous to be face to face with them again. Absolutely. Kelly, you're passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I wonder if you could share with us, where did that start? Was there a transformative moment, or just something that built over time? And secondly, how are you applying that philosophy to the growth and scale of Benevity?
Yeah, it probably started, when I made the switch from the energy industry into technology, which is, about 14 or 15 years ago. One of the things that attracted me to the first tech company I joined, which was Smart Technologies, was the fact that there was a 10-person exec team and 5 were women. And that included both the CEO and the CFO. And that was just not the case in energy. And so I sort of looked around, I was like, wow, isn't this different? And that's actually one of the biggest drivers that helped me to make the jump to tech. And then, as I said earlier, I've had both my kids as a C-suite executive, and that is not something that you see very often, even today. And as you said, Adam, like, it's most often women that put their careers on hold for families. And if, as a society, we actually want to get to true equality, that has to change. And so I wouldn't be able to do what I do without a husband who picks up the majority of the parenting responsibilities. And so it has been a passion of mine for a while. And then Benevity as a company is very unique in the sense that we are 54% women, and most tech companies are, maybe 35% at best. 60% of our exec is women. 55% of all people leaders at Benevity are women, and we're also 34% Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And so, as a company, we didn't get there by setting targets. We've never had targets. We still don't have targets. It was really all about behaviors and just being really thoughtful and intentional about ensuring, you start with making sure you meet and hire diverse candidates into key roles. And then when you have positive senior role models from sort of all walks of life, showing people how it's done, it perpetuates. And so, Benevity hired me right after we had our second child, had to wait 6 months for me to start. We promote women when they're on parental leave. It's not even a question. We review salaries and promotions regularly to ensure there isn't gender or ethnic bias. We provide leader training on building diverse teams and overcoming bias. We, of course, offer flexibility in how people work, which makes it easier for women and frankly, all parents to sort of balance family commitments, and the list goes on. And that's sort of how we got to this place. And really, that that sort of foresight is owed to Benevity's founder, Brian de Lottenville, but I've been more than happy to kind of continue to perpetuate that in my time here.
Kelly, here, the gender parity almost in the company is impressive. Are you using different recruiting and attraction techniques than most other companies might, or is it just sort of that's the way it's panned out?
Yeah, I would say it's actually the list of the behaviors that I just mentioned, which has driven it more than anything. In fact, even though we are where we are, we still only have about 30 to 34%, I think it's 34% of our leaders in tech are women. So it's like, yeah, we're 55% people leaders across the company, but only 34% in tech. So we're always trying to get better as well. And so we're actually in the process of reviewing our own recruitment practices to do more things to sort of make sure that we've got the right set of diverse candidates in the funnel for key tech roles. So it's like, yeah, we've done a really good job in certain parts of the organization, and there's others that still need some work. So I don't think we're doing anything special there. I think it is the fact that, people from all walks of life can see themselves in the leadership team here. Mm-hmm. I remember, when I would get reach outs for CFO roles at other companies, first thing I would do, I would go to the exec leadership page and take a look at the exec team. If it was a bunch of white males, I'd X out the page and not return the call, right? It's sort of like, and so you come to Benevity's leadership page and you see women, you see people, women of color. And I think that sort of, is the case throughout the org. And it's like, if you can see yourself in the company, it gets you in the door. And then, when you then come into the company and you discover, hey, I found my people, it keeps you here. And that's really how we did it.
You listed a number of really important approaches and techniques that you use to achieve greater gender parity. Are there other things that you would encourage other CEOs to consider that you've seen done effectively at other companies, or things that lots of companies just sort of typically miss? Anything that you would encourage your peer CEOs to think about to try and achieve those balance?
Yeah, great question. I would say probably, one pitfall is when companies think about diversity, equity, and inclusion as one thing.
Mm.
It's three different things. And so here's how I think about it. So diversity is stats on paper. It's all the numbers I rattled off a minute ago. It's, 60% of our exec team is women, and 30% of our exec team is Black, Indigenous, people of color. I actually think that's the easy part, although most companies sort of don't get to what I would say is success on that part. But after you have a diverse team, ensuring you get the equity and the inclusion pieces right is really difficult. And so you can have a diverse team and you can still have pay inequity, or you can have males dominating conversations. So there's that, like, you've got a diverse team now. How do you ensure all voices are heard, right? And so I think, like, the real advantage of diverse teams, outside the fact that it's just the right thing to do, is that it's proven that it drives better business outcomes, right? But to get to those better business outcomes, you have to get to diversity of thought, and you have to hear all of those viewpoints. And so when you think about, driving inclusion and that sense of belonging in companies, so that you can get to that point where everyone feels comfortable to speak up, you can create the space for just very diverse viewpoints, but then still come to a decision. It's really, really important and very actually hard to do in practice. And I will say, I've learned a ton just in the 3 years I've been at Benevity about sort of creating the space for those diverse viewpoints. And it's a challenge, and we still have to get better.
Yeah, you're never there, right? It's a journey. You're always working at it day in, day out. Yeah, totally.
Sure.
Kelly, the past couple of years at Benevity have been pretty exciting. You've had some new investors, acquisitions, growth, and scaling. I wonder if you could sort of walk us through what you think are some of the highlights, the high notes of the past couple of years for Benevity, and then also, interesting lessons learned as you grow and scale, and particular commentary around what it's like to do this in a location that is sort of not viewed as a high-profile tech center.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much summed it up there. 2021 was a pretty, it was an exciting year for us. In January, we brought on new majority investors, HG Capital, based in London. And at the same time, two world-leading impact funds, social impact funds, invested in us. One being the Rise Fund, which is co-founded by Bono and includes folks like Richard Branson and Reid Hoffman, and as well as Al Gore's impact fund, Generation IM. So that's been exciting, and really the profile that those impact funds have given us have really helped to elevate Benevity in the C-suite in a way that we never were able to before. We also completed 2 acquisitions. So the first was a local Calgary software company called Chaotix that had a community platform that we're building out to support employee resource groups for our clients. And then the second was the Swiss company I mentioned earlier, Alaya, which is really going to help to accelerate our footprint internationally. We added a bunch of amazing senior talent to the team this last year, including a chief people officer from Shopify, a head of product from Adobe, vice president client success from Workday, just to name a few. And as you mentioned, we also won a bunch of awards, including being selected by Fortune as one of their Impact 20 companies. So 20 companies in the world, making the most positive social impact. So pretty big year.
Yeah.
In terms of what we learned, during the pandemic, I would say, the market for tech talent went from mostly local to quite global. And, I think being in Calgary has not really, having been a part of 3 Calgary tech companies now that all took on sort of major investors throughout their lives, being in Calgary wasn't a barrier for investment. Capital was global, and Calgary companies, I think, are quite successful at attracting, capital from the US or Europe or elsewhere, or even just from other parts of Canada. I think being in Calgary now, with just how the pandemic has changed the way that we work, it's no longer a barrier to finding the talent and the amazing people that companies like ours need, because with virtual and hybrid work, they can be anywhere. Yeah. The flip side of that is now, those Silicon Valley companies target our people and pay them a small fortune in USD, and they can continue working from Calgary or wherever they happen to be based. But actually, being in Calgary hasn't, been a barrier for us at all.
Yeah, it's. I guess once you get to the scale of a company that you are, it changes the game and the nature of things. What's your view in terms of what do we need to do or put in place to help draw more talent, more investment, more activity here to Calgary and Alberta? What do we short of the standard? We need more people, experienced people. Is there anything else that would help catapult Alberta to a better tech position?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of startup activity in Calgary already, which is amazing to see. And that's changed a lot, just even in the last 5 years. The biggest thing from my perspective is we continuing to just make Calgary one of the best cities in the world to live, right? Ultimately, we need young people moving here. We need young people staying here and deciding to build their careers here. You look at sort of some of the migrations that are happening, in the US through the pandemic. And so why are people moving to places like Austin, Texas in droves? It's culture, it's live music, it's, things like that. And so thinking about what do young families want? They want a fantastic education system. They want great healthcare. And so if we make Calgary, a happening place, or Alberta, a place where young people want to be, it'll help companies like ours in the long term to be able to continue to grow our teams here. And it'll also be a place where entrepreneurs, want to establish and grow their businesses as well.
Yeah. So it's less about the right business conditions, quote unquote, and it's more about the quality of life. It sounds like that will be that magnet.
I think it's both, but I am, when you think about the things that cities and provinces, do to attract businesses, a lot has to do with like taxes and things like that. And I feel like that's sort of less applicable to the tech industry because, we're quite used to running with you just sort of focused on being valued based on growth versus profit and cash flow for good chunks of companies' lives. It's quite normal to operate that way. And so things like tax incentives, while they might be meaningful to a larger scaled company, they're not really meaningful to startups or to companies like ours, for example.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You alluded a minute ago to the yin and the yang of access to global talent, yet now they have the ability to come and steal your staff. What are you finding in, other than the fact that, from a compensation standpoint, that seems to be a critical piece, but sounds, layering in the last question, you've got quality of life features that are, you can live here better and nicer than Toronto, probably Vancouver, New York, etc. But are there any other sort of new dynamics in the tech battle for talent that you're seeing play out? And would love to get your thoughts on also that real sweet spot of that experienced tech talent that has sort of 10 years under their belt and a full stack experience base. It seems like a bit of a chicken and an egg that that's what everybody seems to be missing, and what will come first, growing in the sector or trying to attract people here with that experience base. I know that's kind of a long question, but what's your outlook for the HR, the talent side of things as things heat up?
Yeah, tough question. So I think the market for tech talent, as I said, I think is very global, or if you're concerned about time zones, it's at least North America wide if you're trying to compete from Alberta. And so, of course we can't match salaries of Silicon Valley companies, but I do think it's a net benefit to Calgary companies that we can go anywhere now to find the talent we need. And so here's how I kind of think about it is, we hired a great chief product officer who's based in Salt Lake City. Okay. So on the surface, like, how is that helping, Calgary grow tech talent? Well, that person is actually now helping to develop and sort of up level the product management talent that we had here, right? And so if that sort of, perpetuates over time, we're going to have more of that capability in the city, whereas like 5 years ago, trying to hire an experienced product manager in Calgary was, next to impossible, right? There just weren't people around with that experience. And so even though, we can't find every person we need here, we're just over 900 people, about half of our people are in Calgary and half are in other locations. We're still, continuing to develop the capabilities of the team here, which is going to support the ecosystem.
Yeah, I guess that's a really interesting way of looking at it, that no matter where you're finding the talent, is that they're still training, mentoring, developing the team under them, for sure. What do you hear? I mean, you obviously have an ability to attract talent from come work at a very purpose-driven, ESG focused company. What are you hearing from your clients in terms of the ability to access Benevity as I guess an attraction or retention tool, a tie into their ESG efforts? It sort of builds on itself there. What are you hearing from your clients in that regard?
We've now hit the point where I believe this stat is for North America, but millennials are now the largest percentage of people in the workforce. So I think 36% of the workforce is comprised of millennials, and at Benevity, between millennials and Gen Z, that is 86% of our team. And so there is a ton of data out there that shows that this group cares deeply about purpose. They care about purpose. They care about the planet. They want to work for companies and buy from companies who do more than just make a profit. And so, companies that are sort of leaving the world better than they found it. And so there's a lot of data out there on that. Our own data at Benevity of users in our system within our platform shows that companies who engage their people, both in giving and volunteering, they actually experience 57% less employee turnover. And so there's a real desire there to connect, for people to connect their passion for making a social impact with their work lives versus it being something that they do separately in their spare time. And so I just, what we're seeing and what we believe is ultimately companies that are very focused on purpose and on ESG, in a very authentic way versus a paying it lip service kind of way, I think they're going to win the competition for talent.
Yeah, there's been so much research done about the preferences of millennials and that generation for working for something that aligns to personal values through a purpose, and for the ability to attract someone that not only with the work that aligns their purpose, but the ability to integrate their giving and philanthropic preferences directly through the work platform is really enticing. Kelly, as we move to close, we'll sort of look to the future. What does the future hold for Benevity? What excites you about the directions that you're going as a company? And
one of the great things about being a private company is we get to focus on building for the long term versus being too worried about short-term results or quarterly earnings.
Quarter.
So, yeah, and so we recently actually drafted a 10-year vision for the company, and I've not done that actually in any of my prior roles. But we thought about how would the world be different if we were successful in our mission around goodness. And so, today people use Benevity to do good and to give back as part of their work lives because their companies purchase the platform, they match donations, they support them to volunteer, whatever the reason is. The reality is people do good in many aspects of their lives. They do good through their kids' schools, their sports teams, their churches, family circles, friend circles. And so, what gets me excited about the future is, thinking of a future where people think of Benevity and they pull out, the app on their phones when they think of doing good in all aspects of their lives. So, a future where Benevity is a verb and a household brand. And to be honest, where doing good is the equivalent of brushing your teeth. Right. Mm-hmm. And so if everyone who could did just one small act of goodness or act of kindness each day, it adds up to massive positive social impact and would make the world a much better place. So that's what gets me excited thinking about the future.
Yeah. Well, it's exciting. You can vision out 10 years, as you say, as a privately held company. It's I think a luxury that many companies don't always have when they try and do those things, but get drawn back into quarterly guidance and quarterly analyst updates and things like that. So what about the future of Alberta? What excites you about Alberta? You obviously, I would imagine, are recruited left, right, and center to go lead companies anywhere around the globe, but you've chosen to remain here and help build the company here. What excites you about the future for this province?
Yeah, I mean, I chose to be here because I love living here. So I, to be honest, can't think of a better place to raise my young family. I feel like we have it all here in terms of, in Calgary, you really can achieve a 5-minute commute to work if you want to, and you're an hour from the mountains and some of the most beautiful places in the world. And there's, whatever, 1,000 kilometers of biking and walking trails in the city. Like it's a great place to be. When I think about the future, I am excited, and Adam didn't pay me to say this, but I'm really excited about the work the group is doing around Define the Decade and how it might help to change our brand over the coming years to make the province a place that people flock to, just because it's an amazing place to live. I think it's already great. I think we're mostly known for pumping oil and gas out of the ground. And once people learn that, like, yeah, we do that. And by the way, it's very important, if you like things like heat and fuel in your car, but we're also leaders in the energy transition, in the push for net zero. And we have a bunch of other booming industries here like tech. I think it's really going to change the type of people who want to be here and who want to create, innovative new businesses here, like I said earlier. So that's what gets me excited.
Well, you're right. I didn't pay you to say that, but thank you for the kind words on the Define the Decade. We're really excited. We're hoping to get that wrapped up and put it out in the world and let people sort of think about a future for the province. And I agree with you. It is so much about the brand, the reputation that we have external to Alberta, and then also purposefully the choices that we make as a provincial community of people about what's important to us and where we're going to put our efforts and our investments and go forward together. So we're excited to share that with folks. So stay tuned. And Kelly, our last question is we typically like to ask folks is, if you had a magic wand, it could change one thing to make Alberta better. What would you do?
CEOs aren't very good at following instructions. So I'm going to do 2 things instead of one thing. Because it's hard to narrow it down. I think, as I just think about the future of just tech and the province, like, digital literacy starting in elementary schools is key. Like, kids are the future of the province, and that underpinning in technology needs to start early, and it has to be about more than just sort of using a device. And so I think ultimately that's going to be key to our future. I also think, a larger investment in arts and culture, music, science, talking about the reason, things that young people like to do and reasons people want to move to a city. Live music, get the new arena and events center built. I happen to sit on the board of Telespark, the science center, and the management team there has an amazing vision for transforming it into one of the top 10 science centers in the world. Of course, we have to raise a lot of funds from the community to make that happen, but things like that, I think, will help to put Calgary and Alberta on the map. And ultimately, the more people that visit, the more people who will be, wowed because this is such a great place to be and could see themselves, living here. So those are my 2 things.
Those are awesome and inspirational things that we need to be sure. And I think you'll see a lot of that reflected in Define the Decade. So those are great ideas. So Kelly, thank you for your insights, your perspectives, sharing time with us today. And we'll keenly watch the growth and success of Benevity and under your leadership. So thanks again for joining us today.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of C-Suite Unplugged, an Alberta Better podcast series. And this podcast is a production of the Business Council of Alberta. You can learn more about us at businesscouncilab.com. And we'd love to connect with you on social media, so give us a follow at BizCouncilAB on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you liked this episode and want to support our message of shared prosperity for all, please be sure to head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts to subscribe, rate the show, and give us a quick review. New episodes drop every other Tuesday. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.